In the last episode, we left Winston Churchill at the absolute lowest, darkest point of his entire life. Outcast, bankrupt, deeply hated. But he was completely ready. And on May the 10th, 1940, his darkest, most terrifying prophecy finally came true. Nazi Germany began its violent, unstoppable sweep across the West. France, a supposed global superpower, was collapsing rapidly, like a fragile house of cards. And Britain found herself completely alone, naked, and waiting for slaughter. In that terrifying, blood-soaked moment, there was only one man crazy enough to accept the impossible mission. The king summoned the 65-year-old Winston Churchill immediately. The military generals looked at him with deep suspicion. The weak politicians were secretly waiting for him to fail so they could negotiate with Hitler. Everyone whispered, "Surrender is just a matter of time." The British army was trapped at Dunkirk. The treasury was empty. Logically, the battle was lost. But Churchill didn't believe in cold logic. He believed in human will. We will see how one man stopped the greatest military machine in history using his voice. How do you plant hope when there is absolutely no hope? Prepare yourself. Get your coffee ready. Because right now, we enter the war room. Churchill's very first day as Prime Minister. He walked slowly into Parliament, and faces were pale with terror. Everyone expected comforting words and false promises. That is exactly what politicians usually do, right? But Churchill did the exact opposite. He stood up and delivered his immortal, chilling sentence to them. "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." He violently shocked them with the naked, brutal truth of their dark situation. He told them bluntly, "We face long, agonizing months of suffering and ordeal." He didn't promise a quick, painless victory. He promised them immense pain. The British people felt for the first time that someone wasn't treating them like children. They felt this man wasn't lying, and when he confidently added, "But we shall win," they completely believed him, because he told the painful truth first. In June 1940, France officially fell. The biggest ally completely collapsed. The British army escaped miraculously from Dunkirk, leaving all their heavy weapons behind. Britain became a defenseless, lonely island, waiting for the massive German invasion. Hitler fully expected Britain to surrender. Even Churchill's own ministers suggested cowardly negotiations. Here came the role of the secret weapon Churchill sharpened during his dark wilderness years: oratory. He stood to deliver the greatest speech of the century. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields. We shall never surrender." Churchill mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. This speech miraculously turned national fear into boiling, uncontrollable anger. He knew that war isn't just about bullets. It is fundamentally about morale. Churchill made every baker, driver, and nurse feel like a hero in an epic mythology. To convince a highly peaceful people to fight to the absolute death, you must make the enemy a devil, with whom peaceful coexistence is biologically impossible. Churchill was an absolute master of framing. He didn't talk about Adolf Hitler as merely a rival German politician. He described him as a bloodthirsty monster. He framed the brutal war not as a standard conflict over borders, but as a mythical conflict between light and dark, between survival and total extinction. He told them, "If we fall, the whole world will sink into the abyss of a new dark age." This description made negotiation morally impossible. How do you negotiate with the devil? Hitler mocked Churchill on the radio, calling him the drunk madman. But Churchill didn't care about the cheap insults. This strategic framing is exactly what made Britain endure the terrifying Blitz bombings. When German bombs rained on London, destroying homes and killing thousands of innocents. People didn't blame Churchill, they blamed the monster Hitler and grew significantly more determined to destroy him. While Hitler hid deep underground in heavily fortified concrete bunkers, Churchill did the exact opposite. He walked the burning streets of London immediately after the bombings, walking directly over the smoking rubble, with tears in his eyes and a cigar in his mouth. He invented the famous V for Victory sign, a very simple hand gesture, but it spread like wildfire. It became a powerful symbol of underground resistance everywhere. The hat, the cigar, the military coat. He turned himself into a visual icon. He was constantly risking his own life during the deadly, unpredictable air raids. Even his gravelly voice on the radio. It entered every dark home. He sat before the microphone as if sitting with every British family at dinner, acting as the protective father of the nation. And so, thanks to words, symbols, and immense courage, the lonely island held firm. But endurance alone isn't enough to win. He needed a grand plan. Churchill was incredibly brave, but he wasn't stupid. He knew by cold mathematical calculation that small Britain couldn't defeat the massive German war machine alone. He desperately needed the sleeping giant, the United States of America. But America was deeply isolationist and absolutely refused to enter another bloody European war. President Roosevelt was sympathetic, but Congress was a brick wall. Here began Churchill's longest, most brilliant game, the dark art of political seduction. Churchill spent 2 full years writing Roosevelt almost daily, highly crafted letters. He wooed him, sent him top-secret intelligence reports, and explained the creeping global danger. He asked for heavy weapons without looking like a desperate beggar. He famously told him over the radio, "Give us the tools, and we will finish the job." He successfully dragged America step by step toward the conflict. Then came the violent shock he didn't expect, but secretly needed: the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. When Japan attacked America, Churchill slept soundly that night for the first time in years. If the alliance with America was a marriage of love, the alliance with Soviet Russia was a dirty, bloody marriage of pure convenience. Churchill hated communism blindly. He spent his entire political life aggressively fighting the Bolsheviks. But in 1941, Hitler made a fatal error and invaded Russia. What did Churchill do? Did he gloat over Stalin's misery? No. That very night, Churchill announced his full, absolute military alliance with Russia against Germany. This is the absolute definition of maximum pragmatism. In times of severe existential danger, rigid ideologies fall. The common enemy put Churchill and Stalin in one trench. Churchill traveled to freezing Moscow, drank heavy vodka with Stalin, and endured his crude insults, just to ensure the massive Russian army stayed in the war. He knew every single German soldier dying in the Russian snow was a soldier who wouldn't invade London. Politics is not a place for childish, naive idealism. Politics is the dark art of the possible. War isn't just about brute force, it is a trick. And Churchill absolutely loved cunning deception. He believed truth needed a heavy bodyguard of thick lies. Enter the greatest deception operation in human history, the preparation for D-Day. The Allies desperately wanted to liberate France, but the German panzers were waiting for them. Churchill oversaw Operation Bodyguard to completely fool Hitler's mind. They literally created a massive ghost army. Inflatable rubber tanks, wooden airplanes, and completely empty military camps. They sent hundreds of fake radio messages for the listening Germans to easily intercept. Churchill successfully made Hitler believe the attack would be at Calais, while the real Allied forces landed quietly in Normandy. Because of this brilliant deception, Hitler kept his absolute best armored troops in the completely wrong place. Churchill used his cunning mind, trained in his youth during prison escapes. He knew that one drop of blood saved by intelligence is better than 1,000 spilled. He aggressively interfered in spy details and code breaking. He turned the bloody war from a primitive clash of muscles into a high-stakes clash of elite brains. British intelligence completely outsmarted German power. As the bloody war neared its end, Churchill shifted from a fierce warrior to a calculating nation architect. He knew the post-war world was being actively formed. In October 1944, before the famous Yalta Conference, Churchill traveled secretly to Moscow. Late at night, sitting entirely alone with Stalin, he pulled out a blank paper. He sketched out the fate of Eastern Europe, writing ruthless percentages of influence for each country, and slowly pushed the fragile paper across the table to Stalin. Stalin stared at it, took a blue pencil, placed a large check mark on the paper, and returned it. In seconds, the fate of millions was permanently decided. This might seem incredibly cruel, but Churchill was desperately trying to save what could be saved. He knew Stalin's massive army would swallow Eastern Europe anyway. He was already thinking of the next war while the current war hadn't even ended. He tried to warn the naive Americans about Stalin's dark intentions, but they didn't listen until it was far too late. He fought fiercely at every negotiation table. He knew that military victory is completely wasted if you lose the peace. And so, with a pen and a paper, he defined the destiny of modern nations. May 1945. Germany unconditionally surrendered. Churchill is the undisputed crown champion of the free world. The massive crowds in the streets chant his name. You would expect him to rule forever, right? But the ultimate shock happened. In the very first election after the war, the British people voted him out. They brutally ousted Churchill and elected the Labour Party. They kicked out the exact man who saved them from annihilation. His wife Clementine tried to comfort him, whispering it was a blessing in disguise. Churchill replied with bitter sarcasm, "At the moment, it seems quite effectively disguised." But he walked out of Downing Street with absolute dignity. This second devastating fall didn't break him. He was 70 years old, yet he refused to quietly retire. He became the fierce leader of the opposition. And this bitter electoral defeat actually gave him the free time to do something much more important. It gave him time to literally write history. Churchill wasn't finished. He was preparing for a final round to prove to the world that the old lion still had fangs. The whole world was still blindly living the naive euphoria of peace with Soviet Russia. Churchill stood at the podium and said what absolutely no one dared to say. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended. He fiercely warned the world that the Soviet Union was not a friend, but the next terrifying danger. The naive press attacked him again, calling him a warmonger. But as usual, Churchill was entirely right. He predicted the devastating Cold War years before it officially started. His historical insight saw right behind the fake smiles of diplomats. This single speech completely reshaped global politics. America finally woke up and started the policy of containment. Churchill, while out of political power, was drawing the world's map. Eventually, people came back to say, Churchill was right about Hitler, and he is right now about Stalin. Supreme respect returned to the wise, scarred statesman. Churchill knew a very dangerous, unspoken secret. History is always written by the victors, so he famously declared, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." He spent the quiet post-war years writing his massive, multi-volume encyclopedia, The Second World War. He meticulously documented absolutely everything from his own personal point of view. He deliberately made himself the absolute center of global events. Today we view the entire war through Churchill's eyes, because he was the one who told the strongest story. And in 1953, something truly amazing happened. Churchill won the Nobel Prize, but not for peace. He won the ultimate prize for literature. His massive writings made him incredibly wealthy and immortalized his name forever. He understood that the greatest deeds are completely forgotten, if not written down in magnificent style. Did he simply settle for a quiet, wealthy retirement? Of course not. In 1951, at the staggering age of 77, he ran for the national election again, and won. He returned to power as Prime Minister. The stubborn old man utterly refused to die unless he was sitting at the very top. He ruled for another 4 critical years. Looking back at his immense legacy, nothing summarizes his life better than the immortal words he spoke to the young students of Harrow in the darkest days of 1941. He stood before them and delivered the ultimate law. Never give in. Never, 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 never. In nothing, great or small. Never give in except to convictions of honor. These exact words summarized 90 years of brutal struggle, from the broken, stuttering child to the undeniable hero of the free world. The connecting thread was, never give in. Churchill finally died in 1965. His state funeral was the largest gathering in world history. Kings, queens, and presidents traveled to bid farewell to the last Titan. The man who everyone thought would die a miserable failure lived to 90 as a global legend, simply because he absolutely refused to stay down when he was hit. Life will eventually hit you incredibly hard. In that exact dark moment, I want you to remember Winston Churchill. Remember that failure is just a temporary training camp, and remember that you already possess a lethal weapon: your mind, your words, and your unbreakable will.